Welcome to Unlocking Passion. Men Report. Let's begin with a new story. The jungle of Krabi lay still and heavy in the midday heat. When Manfred Kruger, 67 years old, on that bitter April day, stood in front of an empty piece of land and realized that the woman he loved, the woman for whom he had sold his entire life's work, had never existed, at least not in the way he had known her, and that the 700 pounds Ziron he had invested in their shared future had disappeared without a trace, swallowed by a network of lies, forged documents, and corrupt officials who had shaken his hand with smiles in their eyes. The humidity pressed against his chest like an invisible weight. Manfred stood on the unpaved path, surrounded by wild bamboo and palm trees, whose heavy leaves moved sluggishly in the wind. In his right hand, he held crumpled property documents. In his left, his phone, on whose display only one message had appeared for 3 days. The number you have dialed is not assigned. Behind him waited the driver of the rented minibus, an older Thai man with a tired face, who had known at the sight of the address that there would be nothing here. Before him stretched nothing but untamed nature, no luxury resort, no construction site, no trace of excavators or foundations, only silence and the crushing certainty that he had lost everything. But that was only the beginning of the truth, because what Manfred Kruger would discover in the coming weeks was far worse than financial ruin. The woman he loved was married. Her husband was a former police officer, and Manfred was not her first victim. He was the fifth. The resort he had financed existed only on forged papers. The official stamps had been manipulated afterward, and the people who had assured him with serious faces that everything was legal were part of an organized structure that had been defrauding international investors of millions for years. Manfred sank to his knees, his hands in the dusty ground, the sun burning the back of his neck. And for the first time in decades he cried, not only because of the money, but because he realized that he had lost not only his fortune, but also his faith in justice, in love, and in himself. Enjoy the stories I create. Please subscribe, support your visual growth, and dedicate time despite your job commitments. Thank you. Dresden, Autumn, 2021. The Elbe shimmered dully in the afternoon light, while Manfred Kruger stood in his empty apartment in the Neustadt district and stared at the packed moving boxes. 67 years old, newly divorced, and completely alone for the first time in his life. The apartment he had shared with his ex-wife, Sabine, for more than 30 years seemed foreign. Without her furniture, without her plants, without the constant hum of life she had brought with her. Now every step echoed back. The walls still carried the outlines of picture frames that had long since been taken down. Manfred had been a building contractor, and a successful one at that. In his early 30s, he had founded his own company, Kruger Construction and Renovation, and over the decades had built a small empire. He was known for his reliability, his stubbornness, and his pride. Manfred keeps his word, people in Dresden said. When Manfred builds, it lasts 100 years. But all the hard work, all the weekends on construction sites, all the nights spent over calculations and offers had come at a price. Sabine had endured it for years, the absence, the exhaustion, the feeling of always coming second, until she could no longer endure it. "You love your company more than me," she had told him that January evening when she pushed the divorce papers across the kitchen table. Her voice had been calm, almost indifferent. I am 60 years old, Manfred. I do not want to spend the time I have left with a man who is not there when I need him. He had protested, of course. He had promised to do better, but she had only shaken her head. It is too late. The divorce had been handled quickly and coldly. Children, Jonas, 40, and Katharina, 37, had long since been living abroad. Jonas worked as an architect in Canada, Katharina as a doctor in Australia. Both had spoken with him on the phone, but the conversations had been superficial, polite, distant. They had their own lives, their own families. There was no longer any place for Manfred in them, so he sold the company. After months of negotiations, he signed the contract with a larger constructions corporation from Leipzig. The sale price was 700,000, a proud sum for a life full of work, enough to retire comfortably. But what was he supposed to do now? Stay in Dresden? Walk every day through streets where every corner reminded him of Sabine, of the restaurants where they had eaten, the parks where they had walked, the construction sites he had built when the world had still been in order. No, he had to leave. The idea came to him on a gray November evening while he was scrolling through travel portals. Thailand. Phuket. Turquoise water, white beaches, palm trees, and sun. A life without winter, without memories, without the weight of the past. Manfred booked a flight for 2 weeks. Just to see, he told himself, just to think. But when he landed 3 days later at Suvarnabhumi Airport in Bangkok, and the humid warm air wrapped around him, he felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. Phuket welcomed Manfred Kruger like a promise. The island shone she did not know from Germany. The intense green of the jungle hills, the bright turquoise of the Andaman Sea, the pale orange of the sunsets that set the sky on fire every evening. He had booked a small hotel in Patong, not far from the beach. He spent the first days simply existing. He sat in beach restaurants, drank ice-cold beer, ate fresh fish, and watched the bustle around him. Tourists from all over the world, laughing Thai families, street vendors selling sarongs and coconuts. Nobody knew him here. Nobody expected anything from him. Nobody reminded him of his old life. It was liberating. On the 4th day of his stay, he strolled through the old town of Phuket City when he came across a large banner, International Real Estate Fair. Invest in your future. The fair was being held in a modern conference center, bright and air-conditioned, full of well-dressed people standing in front of booths and looking at glossy brochures. Manfred actually had no interest in real estate. He was here to escape life, not to take on new obligations. But something drew him inside. Perhaps habit, because he had dealt with construction projects his entire life. Perhaps curiosity. He walked slowly through the rows, looking at offers for condominiums in Bangkok, villas on Koh Samui, plots of land in Chiang Mai. Most of the salespeople were pushy, too loud, too hungry for a deal. He politely waved them off and continued walking. Then he saw her. She stood at a booth at the end of the hall, in front of an elegant display, bearing the logo Green Horizon Developments. She wore a cream-colored trouser suit. Her long black hair was tied in a loose bun, and she was speaking calmly with an older European couple. Her posture was professional, her gestures measured, nothing intrusive, nothing desperate. Manfred stopped and watched her from a distance. She smiled kindly as the couple thanked her and moved on, and then she began arranging brochures on the table. Her movements were precise, focused. It was clear that she was not a beginner. Without thinking, Manfred stepped closer. "Good day," he said in English. "May I take a look at your offers?" She looked up and smiled. A warm, genuine smile that made her dark eyes light up. "Of course. Welcome to Green Horizon. My name is Tidarat Somai, but you can call me Mina. Are you looking for an investment opportunity here in Thailand?" Her voice was soft, her English flawless. She handed him a brochure with high-gloss photographs of a resort project. Modern bungalows in the middle of tropical gardens, an infinity pool overlooking the sea, elegant restaurants, and wellness areas. "This is our newest project," she explained. "An ecological luxury resort in Krabi. We are looking for investors who do not only want to profit financially, but who also want to be part of something sustainable. No mass hotels, no environmental destruction, only high-quality tourism for people who value quality." Manfred leafed through the brochure. The pictures were impressive, the descriptions convincing, but it was not the brochure that held him. It was the way Mina spoke, calm, intelligent, without pressure. "I am actually not here to invest," he said honestly. "I am only a tourist." She smiled again. "Many people say that. But Thailand has a way of changing people. Sometimes we arrive as tourists and stay as residents." It was a simple sentence, but it struck Manfred right in the heart. That was exactly how it felt, as if this place were changing him. They talked for a while longer. Mina spoke about her company, about the challenges of developing sustainable projects in a country often driven by quick profit. She spoke of her vision to establish Thailand as a destination for sophisticated, environmentally conscious travelers. Manfred spoke about his life in Dresden, about his company, about the divorce. He did not know why he was so open. Perhaps because she listened, truly listened, without judging. As the fair came to an end, she handed him her business card. "If you would like to learn more about the project, feel free to contact me. We also offer on-site visits." Manfred put the card in his pocket and nodded. "Maybe I will do that." When he sat in his hotel that evening and looked out at the sea, he thought of Mina, of her smile, of her intelligence, of the feeling that she had not seen him as a potential customer, but as a human being. For the first time in months, he no longer felt empty. He did not know that this moment was the beginning of his downfall. 3 days later, Manfred wrote Mina a message. It was a simple, polite inquiry. "Hello Mina, I would like to learn more about your project in Krabi. Would you have time for a meeting?" The answer came within an hour. "Hello, Manfred. Of course, gladly. How about tomorrow afternoon? I can drive you to the property so you can see it for yourself." The next day, she picked him up from his hotel in a silver Toyota SUV. She wore a light blouse and some dark trousers, her hair loose, her presence professional and yet warm. She greeted him with a smile and a firm handshake. The drive to Krabi took about 2 hours. It led along the coast, past small fishing villages, through dense jungle, over winding roads that repeatedly opened up spectacular views of the sea. During the drive, Mina spoke about the region, about the challenges of building in protected natural areas, about approval procedures that could take months. "Many investors want quick results," she said while skillfully overtaking a scooter. "But we are not building here for fast money. We are building for generations." Manfred listened and felt his initial interest growing into something bigger. She was so different from the salespeople he had seen at the fair. No empty promises, no exaggerated claims, only honest, thoughtful answers. The property to which she took him lay away from the main road, nestled between wooded hills and overlooking a small protected bay. It was breathtaking. Palm trees lined the natural slope, and in the distance the sea glittered in every shade of blue and green. "This is where the resort is to be built," Mina explained, pointing to different areas of the land. 12 bungalows, all with sea views. A central restaurant with local and international cuisine. A wellness area with traditional Thai massages, and of course an infinity pool right over there. She pointed to an elevated spot from which one had an unobstructed view of the bay. Manfred could already imagine it. Guests sitting by the pool at sunset, the horizon in view, the gentle sound of the waves in the distance. "How far along is the project?" he asked. "We have the permits and the property documents," Mina answered. "Construction is scheduled to begin in 3 months, but we are still looking for investors to fully secure the financing. We do not want to take out large bank loans. Too much risk, too much pressure. We prefer private investors who believe in the project." Manfred nodded slowly. "And how much capital is still needed? In total, we are missing about 1 million euros, she said. "But we also accept smaller amounts. Depending on the investment, you receive either spare shares in the company or fixed returns over 10 years. She showed him documents, construction plans, cost estimates, permit papers. Everything looked professional, detailed, well thought out. The stamps and signatures on the papers appeared official. "May I take the documents to my lawyer?" Manfred asked. "Of course," Mina said, without hesitation. "I want you to feel absolutely safe. This is a big decision." Her openness impressed him. No evasions, no pressure, only transparency. On the way back to Phuket, Mina stopped at a small roadside restaurant. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "They have the best som tam in the area here." They ate together under a simple thatched roof, surrounded by locals. Mina ordered in Thai, laughed with the owner, and explained the different dishes to Manfred. It did not feel like a business meeting. It felt like a meeting between friends. "Why did you really come to Thailand?" she suddenly asked, while eating her papaya salad. Manfred hesitated, then he told her the truth. About the divorce, about the loneliness, about the feeling that his life in Germany was over, and that he needed a new beginning. Mina listened without interrupting him. When he had finished, she put her fork aside and looked at him. "I understand that. I was once at a point where I wanted to leave everything behind as well. Sometimes a new beginning is the bravest thing we can do." In that moment, under the thatched roof of a simple restaurant surrounded by unfamiliar voices and exotic smells, Manfred felt something he had not expected, a connection. He did not know that Mina had carefully planned every word, every gesture, every smile, that she had recognized his loneliness and identified it as a weakness, that she knew exactly how to draw him into her web. Because Mina was not a real estate agent. She was a hunter, and Manfred was her next prey. In the following weeks, a relationship developed between Manfred and Mina that went beyond business. They met regularly, sometimes to discuss details of the resort project, sometimes simply to have lunch together or stroll through the markets of Phuket City. Mina showed him places no tourist ever saw, small temples in the mountains, hidden waterfalls, restaurants in side streets where the locals ate. She taught him Thai words, laughed at his pronunciation, and patiently corrected him. She spoke about her family, about her late mother, about her dream of creating something lasting one day. Manfred felt more and more drawn to her. It was not only her beauty, although he noticed that, of course. It was her intelligence, her warmth, the way she listened to him as if his words truly mattered. One evening, they sat on the terrace of a beach restaurant in Kata. The sun had just set, the sky a washed-out orange and violet. The sea murmured softly before them. The air was warm and heavy. "Manfred," Mina said quietly, looking at him across the table. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Have you ever thought about staying here? Permanently, I mean, not only as an investor, but as someone who lives here." The question surprised him. He had actually thought about it in recent nights, when he lay alone in his hotel room and stared out at the sea. What still held him in Germany? The children, who lived far away anyway. The memories of a failed marriage. "I have thought about it," he admitted, "but I do not know whether it is realistic. I do not know the country well enough. I do not speak the language. I have no connections here." Mina smiled. "But you could have connections. You could be parts of something. The resort, it is not only a business. It could be your home. Our home." The last word hung in the air between them. Our. Manfred felt his heart beat faster. "What do you mean by that?" She reached across the table and placed her hand on his. Her skin was warm, her touch gentle. "I mean that I like you, Manfred. Very much. You are different from most men I meet here. You are honest. You are kind. You do not see me only as a business partner." He stared at her hand resting on his. His mind told him to be careful, but his heart, his lonely, hungry heart, wanted to believe that what she said was real. "I like you too," he said softly. "More than I should." She smiled, and in that moment, beneath the darkening sky of Kata Beach, she kissed him. It was a gentle kiss, careful, almost shy, but it felt like a promise. In the following days, their friendship became more. They spent almost every day together. Manfred extended his stay. 2 weeks became 3, then 4. He rented a small apartment in Patong. Only temporarily, he told himself, to have more time to examine the project. But in truth, it was because of Mina. They talked about the future. They imagined what the resort would look like, how they would welcome guests together, how they could build a life based on trust and shared dreams. "We are not building this only for others," Mina said one night as they sat on the balcony of his apartment. "We are building it for us, for our life." Manfred believed her. How could he not? She was everything he had wished for. Intelligent, beautiful, ambitious, loving. She did not see him as an old man, but as a partner. She did not need him for his money, but for who he was. At least that was what he believed. One morning, as they were having breakfast together, Mina placed a folder in front of him. "The financing is getting closer," she said. "We have already found 3 other investors, but we are still missing a larger amount in order to begin construction. The construction company needs a deposit." "How much?" Manfred asked. "Euro 250,000, she answered. "That would be for the land purchase and the first preparations. You would not have to provide everything at once. We could divide it into installments. But the sooner we start, the sooner we can generate income." Manfred leafed through the documents. Contracts, cost estimates, schedules, Everything looked legitimate, and Mina had given him no reason to doubt her. "I have to think about it," he said. "Of course," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "I do not want you to feel pressured. But I believe in us, Manfred. I believe we can build something great." That night, alone in his apartment, Manfred stayed awake for a long time. He thought about his life in Dresden, about the $700,000 in his account, the result of an entire life of hard work. And he thought of Mina, of her smile, of her promise. The next morning, he called his bank in Germany and ordered the transfer. 250,000 dues to the account of Green Horizon Developments. It was the first step into his downfall. The transfer was completed. $250,000, almost a third of his entire fortune, now lay in an account in Thailand, and Manfred Kruger felt excited and uneasy at the same time. It was the most money he had ever invested at once, and although Mina had assured him that everything was in order, a quiet voice gnawed inside him. "This is the beginning of our shared future," Mina had said when he told her about the transfer. She had embraced him, kissed him, thanked him. "You will see, Manfred. In 1 year he will stand here and open the most beautiful resort in Krabi." But the weeks that followed brought a strange change. At first, everything was as before. Mina showed him progress reports, sent him photos of the property on which survey work was supposedly being carried out. They continued to meet regularly, went out to eat, spent time at the beach, but Manfred noticed small inconsistencies. Once he asked whether he could meet the construction company that was supposed to carry out the project. Mina hesitated. "They are currently busy with another project, but I can arrange a meeting as soon as they have time." The meeting never took place. Another time he wanted to know when the building permit would officially be issued. "Soon," Mina said. "Thai bureaucracy is slow, you know that. But everything is going according to plan." And then, about 6 weeks after the first transfer, Mina came to him with a new request. They were sitting in a cafe in Phuket. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background. Mina seemed tense, her hands gripping her coffee cup. "Manfred," she began. "We have a problem." His stomach tightened. "What kind of problem?" "The government is demanding additional fees for the building permit. It is complicated. Something to do with environmental requirements and reports. We need another $150,000 to finally secure the permit." Manfred stared at her. "Euros? That was never mentioned." "I know," she said, reaching for his hand. "I am sorry. This is just as unexpected for me. But without this permit, we cannot build. And if we do not build soon, we will lose the other investors. They are getting nervous." "Can the other investors not provide more money?" Mina shook her head. "They have already invested their maximum amounts. You are the only one who still has capital available." Manfred pulled his hand back. "That is a lot of money, Mina." "I know," she whispered. "But think about what we are building. Think about our future. I would not ask you if it were not absolutely necessary." He looked into her eyes. They seemed honest, even desperate. But something inside him warned him, a voice deep within that said, "Stop, go to the police, have this checked." Yet then he thought about the past months, about the warmth he had felt, about the feeling of being needed again, of being loved, about the vision of a new life. "I will transfer the money," he finally said. But afterward I want a meeting with everyone involved. With the construction company, with the notary, with everyone. I want to see that everything is legal and transparent." "Of course," Mina said with relief. "I promise you." The second transfer took place a week later, $150,000. Manfred had now invested a total of $400,000, more than half of his fortune. But the promised meeting did not take place. Again and again there were excuses. The notary was sick. The construction companies had an emergency on another construction site. The documents were not yet ready. And then, 2 months later, came the third request. "Manfred, we have the building permit," Mina announced on the phone, her voice trembling with excitement. "But now we have to act quickly. The construction company wants to begin immediately, but they need another deposit. $200,000 for materials and labor." "Euro 200,000? He repeated in disbelief. "Mina, that is, I know how it sounds," she interrupted him. "But this is the last major amount. After that, construction begins, and in 6 months we can welcome the first guests. Think of the returns. Think of what we can achieve." Manfred sat in his apartment with the phone to his ear and felt his chest tightening. $200,000. That would mean he had invested a total of $600,000, almost his entire fortune. "I have to see the project," he said firmly. "I want to go to Krabi and see with my own eyes what is happening." "Of course," Mina said. "Let us go tomorrow. I will show you everything." But the next morning she called and said she was sick. High fever, stomach flu. "I am so sorry, Manfred. Can we postpone it?" He postponed it, and then he postponed it again, because she said she had important meetings, and then once more, because the weather was supposedly too bad. 3 weeks later, he transferred the $200,000. Not because he was convinced, but because he was afraid. Afraid of losing everything he had already invested. Afraid of losing Mina. Afraid of admitting that he had made a mistake. $600,000 was now gone, and Manfred Kruger had nothing in his hands except promises. It was a hot April day when Manfred Kruger finally decided to travel to Krabi, with or without Mina. He had barely slept for 2 weeks, tormented by nightmares in which money ran through his fingers like sand. The investment weighed heavily on him, and the excuses Mina gave him sounded increasingly hollow. "I am going to Krabi tomorrow," he wrote to her in a short message. "I need to see the project." The reply came quickly. "Of course, I will come with you." But the next morning she called. "Manfred, I am so sorry. My father had an accident. I have to go to Bangkok to the hospital. But you can still go. I will send you the exact address." Manfred felt his stomach clench. Another excuse, but this time he would not give in. "Send me the address," he said only. He rented a minibus with a driver and set off early in the morning. The drive through the lush landscape of southern Thailand no longer seemed picturesque that day, but threatening. The dense palms along the road seemed to crush him. The heat was suffocating. The address Mina had sent him led him away from the main road and deep into a rural area. The driver, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, looked at Manfred skeptically several times in the rearview mirror. "Are you sure a resort is being built here?" he asked in broken English. "There is nothing here." "Just keep driving," Manfred said, although he felt panic rising inside him. After almost 30 minutes on unpaved roads, the driver finally stopped. "This is the address." Manfred got out and found himself on a narrow path leading into dense jungle. There were no signs, no indications of construction work, no barriers, only wilderness. "Wait here," he told the driver, and began walking along the path. After about 200 meters, he reached a clearing. His heart raced, and then he saw it. Nothing. No construction site, no foundations, no construction machines, only an empty piece of land overgrown with grass and bamboo, surrounded by dense jungle. The sea was visible in the distance. Yes, but there was no trace of the project into which he had invested 600,000 notes. Manfred stood there, the sun burning the back of his neck. Sweat ran down his face, his legs trembled. He pulled the property documents from his pocket and stared at the addresses, the stamps, the signatures. Everything was a lie. He sank to his knees, the documents falling to the ground. Reality struck him with full force. He had been deceived. The resort did not exist. Perhaps it had never existed. And Mina? He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, "The number you have dialed is not assigned." He tried again. The same result. He opened her email address and wrote a desperate message. "Mina, what is going on here? Where are you? Where is the resort?" The message came back as undeliverable. Manfred felt dizzy. He vomited beside the path. His whole body shook. $600,000, more than half of his life's work, gone. The driver helped him back to the bus. "Everything all right?" he asked worriedly. "No," Manfred whispered. "Nothing is all right." Back in Phuket, Manfred ran directly to the office that Mina had shown him as the headquarters of Green Horizon Developments. It was a small office building on a side street in Phuket City. But when he rushed up the stairs and opened the door to the specified office number, he found only an empty room. No furniture, no computers, no trace of a company. "Excuse me," he asked a woman in the neighboring office. "Do you know where the Green Horizon Company is?" The woman shook her head. "There has never been a company by that name here. This office has been empty for months." Manfred staggered back onto the street. The world spun around him. He went to the police. The police station was an unremarkable building with stained walls and humming fans. An officer, a young man in uniform with a bored expression, took his statement. "I was defrauded," Manfred said, placing the documents before him. "This woman defrauded me of 600,000. The officer slowly leafed through the papers without visible interest. "Do you have proof that the money went to her?" "I have transfer receipts," Manfred said, showing them to him. "To which account?" "To Green Horizon Developments." The officer typed something into his computer. "This company does not exist in our registers." "Of course not," Manfred cried desperately. "That is why I am here. She deceived me." The officer leaned back and crossed his arms. "Listen, cases like this are complicated. The woman has disappeared. The company does not exist. The money is gone. We can record a complaint, but I have to tell you honestly, the chances that you will get your money back are very low." "Very low," Manfred repeated, stunned. "That is my whole life." "That is." "I understand," the officer said, but his tone was indifferent. "But you are not the first person this has happened to, and you will not be the last. Investment fraud involving foreigners is unfortunately common here." Manfred left the police station with a feeling of complete helplessness. He had lost $600,000, and no one seemed to care. But the worst was yet to come. Manfred spent the next few days in a state between shock and rage. He could not sleep, could barely eat. He searched the internet for clues about Mina, about Green Horizon developments, about anything that could help him find her. But there was nothing. She had disappeared like a ghost. He contacted his bank in Germany, but they informed him that the transfers could not be reversed. The money had gone to a Thai account that had since been closed. The trail ended there. Desperate, Manfred turned to a lawyer in Phuket, a German who had lived in Thailand for years and specialized in cases involving foreign victims. The lawyer, Mr. Schneider, a man in his late 50s with a gray beard and tired eyes, listened to Manfred's story and sighed heavily. "Mr. Kruger," he said, "what happened to you is unfortunately not an isolated case. This kind of fraud is called romantic investment fraud. The perpetrator builds an emotional relationship, gains your trust, and uses that to move you into financial investments." "Can you help me find her?" Manfred asked. Schneider hesitated. "I can investigate, but I must tell you honestly, these people work professionally. They use false names, forged documents, shell companies. The chances of actually catching them are very low. But the police do not have the resources for such cases." Schneider interrupted him. "And frankly, sometimes officials are also involved in such networks." Manfred stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean that these fraudsters often have connections to local authorities. The forged stamps on their documents, the alleged permits. That cannot happen without insider knowledge." The words struck Manfred like blows. "You mean the police are involved?" "Not necessarily the police, but possibly other officials. Land offices, notaries. Thailand has a corruption problem. That is no secret." Schneider began his investigation. He found out that the bank account to which Manfred had transferred the money was registered in the name of a company that had existed for only a few months. The company had been founded by a woman named Thaidarat Somchai, the name Mina had given him. But the address listed at the time of the company's registration led to an empty plot of land. "Thaidarat Somchai is probably not her real name," Schneider said. "She most likely used stolen or forged documents to register the company." "And the property documents?" Manfred asked. Schneider examined the documents Manfred had received. After a few days, he called him. "Mr. Kruger, I have bad news. The property documents are forgeries. The stamps are copied. The signatures are not authentic. The property that was shown to Chondu actually belongs to the Thai state and is under nature protection. It cannot be built on at all." Manfred sat in his hotel room and stared at the documents lying in front of him. Everything had been a lie. Every word, every gesture, every promise. Mina had deceived him from the beginning. He felt as if he were drowning. It was not only the money that was gone. His self-worth, his belief in people, his trust in the world had been destroyed. And then came the final blow. Schneider called him 2 weeks later. "Mr. Kruger, I have found something out. You should sit down." Manfred sat down, his heart pounding wildly. "What did you find?" "I contacted a private detective who works on such cases. He has information about the woman you know as Mina. Her real name is Thaidarat Somchai. She is married. Her husband is a former police officer named Somchai Pradit. Together, they have been running a fraud network for years that specifically targets wealthy foreign men. Manfred felt nauseous. Married? Yes, and there is more. You are not the first victim. The detective has identified at least 4 other men who were defrauded in a similar way. In total, they have stolen more than 2 million euros. 2 million, yes. And that is only what we know. There may be more. Manfred hung up the phone and sat motionless for a long time. Married. Part of an organized network. A former police officer as a partner. The woman he had loved, who had given him hope, was a professional fraudster. He no longer felt like a person. He felt like an empty shell. That night, he stood on the balcony of his apartment and looked out at the dark sea. The waves murmured softly. The stars sparkled indifferently in the sky. For the first time in his life, Manfred seriously thought about ending everything. But then he thought of his children, of Jonas and Katharina. They knew nothing of what had happened. If he gave up now, they would never learn why. They would only know that their father had failed. No, he would not give up. Not yet. He would fight, not to get the money back, because that was lost, but to bring the truth to light, to warn others, to make sure that Mina's victims had not suffered in vain. It was the first spark of hope in weeks. Small, but there. Manfred Kruger refused to remain a passive victim. Even though the police gave him little hope and his lawyer told him honestly that the chances were minimal, he began to research on his own. He searched internet forums where fraud victims exchanged information, looked for patterns, names, clues, and found them. On an international forum for fraud victims, he came across a post by a man from the Netherlands. The man, a retired engineer named Pete, described a story frighteningly similar to Manfred's own. An attractive Thai woman posing as a real estate agent, a resort project in southern Thailand, investments in several stages, and then the sudden disappearance of the woman and the money. Manfred wrote Pete a message. Within hours, he received a reply. They exchanged stories and compared details. The woman Pete had met had introduced herself as Nina, but the description matched Mina exactly. Pete had also received documents with forged stamps. He, too, had lost several €100,000 in total. I hired a private detective, Pete wrote. He found out that there is an entire network. The woman does not work alone. Her husband coordinates everything. He used to be with the police and knows all the loopholes in the system. Manfred felt rage building inside him. Can we hold them accountable? Difficult, Pete replied. The detective says they constantly change their identities. Forged passports, new names, new bank accounts. They are professionals. But Manfred did not give up. Together with Pete and 2 other victims they found through the forum, an American named Robert and an Australian named David, they formed an informal group. They called themselves the Forgotten Investors and exchanged information, coordinating their efforts. Robert, who lived in Bangkok, hired another private detective. This detective, a former police officer himself, had contacts and access to information that would otherwise have been denied to them. After weeks of intensive investigation, the detective called Manfred. I have something. What? Manfred asked. His heart raced. The woman you know is actually called Tidarat Kamalchai. Her husband is Somchai Pradit, a former police officer. They live in a suburb of Bangkok. I have their address. Manfred felt adrenaline shoot through his veins. "Can we go to the police?" "You can try," the detective said carefully. "But I have to warn you, Somchai still has connections to the police. There is a danger that a complaint will go nowhere, or that he will be warned in advance. What do you suggest? Go public. If you make the story public, it will be harder for them to continue. And perhaps the pressure will force the authorities to actually act." Manfred discussed the idea with Pete, Robert, and David. They agreed. They had to tell their stories. Not to get the money back, which realistically was lost, but to warn others, to make sure Tidarat and Somchai could not simply continue. Robert contacted an investigative journalist at a Thai news website. The journalist, a young man named Anon, was immediately interested. "This is a major story," he said. "Romantic investment fraud with connections to the police. That will cause a stir." They arranged a meeting in Bangkok. Manfred flew from Phuket to the capital, nervous but determined. Anon interviewed him in detail, photographed the forged documents, and noted every detail. "I need a few weeks to research and verify the story," Anon said. "But if everything is confirmed, I will publish it." Manfred waited. The weeks felt like years. Every day he checked his emails, waiting for news. And then, on a Wednesday morning in July, the article appeared. The headline read, "The Luxury Never Existed: How a German Fraud Victim Lost More Than $600,000 to an Organized Network." The article was extensive, detailed, and merciless. It described Manfred's story and also quoted Pete, Robert, and David. It named Tidarat and Somchai, showed photographs of the forged documents, and asked the uncomfortable question, why had the police done nothing? The reaction was overwhelming. The article was shared thousands of times, discussed on social media, and picked up by international news agencies. Suddenly, Manfred's case was in the spotlight, and the Thai authorities were forced to react. The publication of the article brought movement into the case, but not in the way Manfred had hoped. The Thai police issued an official statement. They would investigate the allegations and do everything to bring the perpetrators to justice. But weeks passed, and nothing happened. Manfred, however, received unexpected messages. More victims came forward. People from Great Britain, France, Japan, men and women who all had similar stories. Some had been defrauded of $100,000, others of far more. A French businessman had lost over €1 million. It was devastating to realize how systematic and far-reaching the network had been. Tidarat and Somchai were only two names in a larger system. There were other people carrying out similar scams. Professional fraudsters, who specifically targeted wealthy foreigners who were searching for love, belonging, and a new beginning. Manfred suddenly no longer felt alone, but the feeling was bitter. It was a community of suffering. In August, 3 months after the article was published, the news everyone had been waiting for arrived. The police had arrested Tidarat and Somchai. It was a major raid in a suburb of Bangkok. In their house, the police found computers with lists of victims, forged documents, and several passports with different names. It was a professional fraud empire. But the joy over the arrest was short-lived, because soon afterward it became known that Somchai had been released on bail. Tidarat as well. The reason given was that there was no risk of flight. Manfred was beside himself. No risk of flight? They had defrauded people for years. They had false identities. Of course they would flee. But his protests went unheard. And indeed, 2 weeks after their release, Tidarat and Somchai had disappeared. Their apartment had been cleared out. Their phones were dead, and they had gone underground. Manfred sat in his small apartment in Hua Hin, where he was now living. He had left Phuket because too many memories of Mina haunted him there, and he felt completely helpless. He had fought, had told his story, had helped identify the perpetrators, and still they had escaped. "That is Thailand," said Mr. Schneider, his lawyer, when Manfred called him. "Corruption, inefficiency, lack of resources. Sometimes the perpetrators simply get away." "That is not justice," Manfred said quietly. "No," Schneider agreed. "But it is reality." Manfred had only 100,000 left, the money he had not invested. It was just enough to live modestly in Thailand, but not enough to return to Germany and build a new life there. He was trapped. He took a job with a German online magazine that wrote about fraud and safety in Southeast Asia. He became a kind of expert, someone who could speak from his own experience. He wrote articles, warned others, shared his story again and again. It was therapeutic, but it did not heal the wound. On some days, he sat on the beach in Hua Hin and stared at the sea. He thought of the life he could have had, of the resort that had never existed, of Mina, who had never existed, at least not in the way he had known her. He had not only lost money, he had lost his dignity, his trust, his hope. And yet he went on, because giving up would have meant that Mina, or Tidarat, or whoever she really was, had won. And he could not allow that. Today, 3 years after that April day, when Manfred Kruger stood before an empty plot of land in Krabi, he sits in a simple apartment in Hua Hin. The apartment is small, sparsely furnished, but clean. From his balcony, he can see the sea. The same sea that had once filled him with hope and now is only a bitter memory. He is 70 years old. His hair has become grayer, his face more sunken. The years in Thailand have marked him, not physically, but emotionally. He lives on what remains to him, continues to work for the magazine, writes about fraud, warns others. Sometimes people contact him, readers, Zeus, who have read his articles, people who have been defrauded themselves or who are afraid of being defrauded. He answers everyone, gives advice, shares his experiences. It is the only thing that gives him the feeling that his pain was not in vain. Tidarat and Somchai were never found again. There were rumors that they had fled to Laos or Cambodia, that they were continuing under new names. The police had allegedly stopped the investigation. Insufficient evidence, it was officially said, but Manfred knew that it was more likely indifference and corruption. He had not heard from his children in months. But Jonas and Katharina had written to him at first, after he told them about the fraud. But the conversations had been strained, embarrassing. They did not understand how he could have been so naive. They were disappointed in him, and so the messages had eventually stopped. Manfred often thought back to the moment when Mina had kissed him on that evening at Kata Beach. He remembered how real it had felt, how strongly he had believed that she loved him. And then he asked himself, had anything she had ever said or done been real at all? Or was everything, every smile, every touch, every word, a calculated lie? He would never know. One evening, while he was sitting at the computer and working on a new article, he received an email from Pete, the Dutch engineer. "Hello, Manfred," he wrote. "I just wanted to tell you that I have given up. I tried to keep fighting, but it makes no sense. The money is gone, the perpetrators are gone, and I have no strength left. I am moving back to Amsterdam. I hope you find your peace. Manfred stared at the email. He understood Pete. He understood the exhaustion, the despair, the need simply to give up and move on, but he could not. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. He replied, I understand you, Pete, but I cannot stop. Not because I believe I can win, but because I cannot allow them to get away without the world knowing what they have done. He sent the email and leaned back. Through the open window, he heard the sound of the sea, the chirping of crickets, the distant honking of scooters on the road. Manfred Kruger had lost $700,000, but he had lost much more. His belief in love, in justice, in the goodness of people. And yet he went on, because giving up would have meant that the darkness had won. And he could not allow that. I thought I had lost money, he whispered into the darkness of his apartment. But I lost much more, my trust in justice. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. And while night fell over Hua Hin, over Thailand, over the countless victims of fraud and manipulation, Manfred remained seated, writing, fighting, living, because that was all he had left.